Welcome into Hittin Hard with Jon Chuckery here on Locked On Sports Atlanta. Today on the show, it still came down to the same basic things. A potential value pickup for the Atlanta Falcons, and the Hawks dodged a bullet. Now make it count. It's all next. It's Hittin Hard with Jon Chuckery, Locked On Sports Atlanta.
This is Hittin Hard with Jon Chuckery, part of Locked On Sports Atlanta. And it starts now.
Hittin Hard is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook, official sportsbook of Locked On. Make every moment more. Visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn today to get started. We ask you to head to YouTube.com, put Locked On Sports Atlanta into your search browser. When you get there, hit that subscribe button, leave us a comment. We are free and available to download on all of your favorite podcast platforms, including Spotify, Apple. Check us out on all of your platforms. And, of course, Roku and Amazon Fire. Yes, we are available on those platforms as well. Check us out there. And then, of course, give me a follow at my personal Twitter page at JMCH316. Well, the Super Bowl last night provided a lot of drama, but here's the thing. And it's not about calls and different stuff like that. And, you know, Mahomes was really good, but I personally, I don't think he should have won the MVP award. You know who should have won the MVP award? The offensive line of the Kansas City Chiefs. That group that stopped the number one pass rush in all of the NFL. 4 guys with double-digit sacks, 4th most sacks in the history of the league, 70 sacks for one season. They were outstanding. And it just got me thinking, you know, and we'll kind of tie this into the Falcons. But you look at Thuney and Orlando Brown and Creed Humphrey, a combination of guys that you drafted, combination of guys you spend big free agent money on. And here's the thing. Here's how we tied into the Falcons. You know, for instance, you know, let me talk about Creed Humphrey for a second. I'll back up. Let me talk about Creed Humphrey. Creed Humphrey, 2nd-round pick, center out of Oklahoma. Not sexy, pretty good player, this, that, and the other. I saw a scouting report. I was reading a scouting report on him that NFL.com said, you know, maybe he'll eventually be an average starter in the league. What did Creed Humphrey do? Well, let's see. His rookie year, he was the highest graded rookie from Pro Football Focus in the NFL. And then his second year, he was second team All-Pro. See, that's the kind of guys that you draft and you get good. But here's how I want to tie in the Falcons, okay? Falcons had a top 5 offensive line this particular season. They were stupendous in the running game, still had some pass protection issues, but they were certainly better year over year in their pass protection, even though they didn't throw the ball nearly as much and they had mobile quarterbacks and stuff like that. But still, they were better, and they were a better offensive line group. And it got me thinking, you know, I've talked about this in, you know, previous podcasts and stuff like that. Can't be afraid to go spend more money, more draft capital on your lines of scrimmage. Yes, Falcons have 3 first-round picks, right? They've got Matthews. They've got McGarry. They've got Chris Lindstrom. And yes, McGarry's a free agent. I want to sign him back up. And then I want to go get like a Nate Davis, who's a big-time left guard. Well, you know, we're spending all this money. You know, Nate Davis is a guy who's projected he's going to be in the $7 to $8 million range. And McGarry's probably going to get, you know, $8, $10, $12 million himself, maybe more. Maybe McGarry gets more than that. I mean, the franchise tag is $18 million. But you can't have enough of those guys. You can't invest enough draft capital, enough free agent dollars when it comes to guys on the line of scrimmage. You know, the Chiefs have spent between their draft capital and their free agent money that they've spent a lot on their offensive line. And what happens? Well, you know, the rookie running backs are making plays. Pat Mahomes is able to just stand back there and throw and do what he wants against the best pass rush that we've seen. One of the best pass rushes that we've ever seen in the history of the NFL. Pat Mahomes out there doing his thing. Had the big scramble run, up the middle, late in that game. You just can't invest enough on both sides of your lines of scrimmage. And, when we look at third or fifth or whatever round picks and, we're going on the cheap to put our left, you can't, you gotta get the guys that win football games. You have to get the guys that win the football games. You have to draft well. You have to sign your free agents well. But you have to put real capital into some of those guys. Well, Jalen Mayfield's a third-round pick and all that. Okay, he was the worst interior offensive lineman in the NFL, maybe in the history of the NFL. Well, we signed a cheap option on a one-year deal and Elijah Wilkinson. Okay, he played well, but that's not a difference maker on your offensive line. You have to build off your strengths. You have to build yourself in the trenches. And it just so stood out to me that watching that game, the fact that the Chiefs have invested high capital in their offensive line, the fact that they've spent free agent dollars on the offensive line, because when you have a great quarterback, you have to do everything in your power to protect him. And if it costs the Falcons money for Caleb McGarry, spend the money. If it costs the Falcons money to have a top-tier left guard, spend the money. If you need to go get a center in the first or second round, spend the money. Whatever it is. Defensive line, offensive line, you just can't spend enough in free agency or draft capital to get those guys. Well, they're not best available players and all this kind of stuff. I don't know if Creed Humphrey was the best available player, but he certainly is a difference maker for why they win football games, and certainly was a difference maker for why they're the Super Bowl champions now. Can I have some of those guys? I don't care if they're sexy. I don't care where they play. I don't care what their profile is. I don't care if they're unicorns and all this kind of stuff. This is my frustration about that. We just don't do the things that winning organizations do. And you see the Chiefs are a perfect example of that. That they invested high capital, second-round pick. Yeah, it's not sexy. Tristan Wirfs, a first-round pick. Well, he's not sexy. Well, he was first team all NFL when they were the Super Bowl champions for protecting Tom Brady. Guys like that are why you win in the NFL. Guys like that, investing high capital. I believe that Orlando Brown, I think, was the fourth highest cap hit on the Chiefs roster this year. I think it was an $18 million tackle. So those are places that when you talk about your offensive and defensive lines, you can't go cheap. You can't be willing to not give up, put high draft capital on those guys. We talked about this the other day. 70% of the top 10 active sack leaders are first-round picks. 70% of the top 20 active sack leaders are first-round pick. 70% of the active sack leaders in the top 25 are first-round picks. So the vast majority of those guys all come from the first round. Yes, you have to draft well. You can't draft bums. You can't draft Tack McKinley, because it's cool that he held up a picture of his mom or his grandma or whatever like that. Can the guy play football? Difference between why the Cowboys are good is because you draft Micah Parsons versus you draft Tack McKinley. But you can't have enough capital and resources to address your offensive and defensive lines of scrimmage. And that's where it's all won in the NFL. The difference in that game for what Mahomes did and Devontae Smith and A.J. Brown and this guy and that guy and Kelsey and blah, 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 blah. The difference in that game was, at the end of the day, was they stopped completely the Philadelphia Eagles pass rush to where they had no sacks. After they picked up almost 80 sacks from week 1 until the Super Bowl leading up to it, they had almost 80 sacks, and didn't touch Mahomes. They didn't knock Mahomes back behind the line of scrimmage. That's what won them the game at the end of the day. I want to talk about my friends over at FanDuel. Listen, we're right here in NBA. We're getting close to the All-Star game. It's a perfect time to sign up with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. So we've got the no-sweat first bet available to you to where you can get as much as potentially $1,000 in bonus bets if your first bet doesn't win. Download the FanDuel Sportsbook app. It's safe, secure, super easy to use. You can bet on everything from money lines to point scores to props, everything else that's available to you. You like the Hawks tonight? They're a 5-point favorite. Maybe you get in on the action there. Plus, FanDuel lets you combine your bets for an even bigger chance at bigger payouts with the same game parlay. So don't miss your chance to get the no-sweat first bet for up to $1,000 in bonus bets when you go to FanDuel.com/lockedon. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon. Make every moment more with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. So one guy that I'm looking at for the Falcons, because I don't like the top tier guys that are the top pass rush free agents as far as defensive edge players and stuff like that. Like, I like Robert Quinn, but I don't think that Robert Quinn is on certainly the uptick of his career or anything like that. One name I'm going to give you is a guy that signed a 1-year, $5 million deal with the Miami Dolphins last year. And I'll talk about his production here in a second, but it's Melvin Ingram. Now, they ran basically a 3-4 type of system. So he played kind of edge, outside linebacker. So schematically, you're not talking about a guy that's a completely different kind of fit and things like that. Okay. Now, everybody in the NFL, and I keep looking at these guys, like everybody in the NFL, when they go somewhere, they seem like they accumulate sacks. Melvin Ingram last year played all 17 games. He only had 3 starts for Miami, but he still accumulated 6 sacks. Now, that would have led our team last year. Think about what that number is. Think about Melvin Ingram was a guy who lost his, potential to start as the season went on when they got Bradley Chubb and, he kind of was getting phased out of the mix and he didn't play as much and, they don't look like they're going to bring him back or anything. And he still had 6 sacks. So if I'm looking for a guy that is not a high-priced guy to get for the Atlanta Falcons, a guy who can have some moments, maybe mentor, they talked about the way that he worked with Jalen Phillips in Miami, a guy who can maybe be a good influence on, Arnold Ebiketie and rub off on him a little bit. If you're looking for maybe a low-tier kind of free agent that's at the edge spot, that doesn't break the bank and doesn't overspend, because look, I want to put the 8th pick into a defensive edge player, whatever that is. Whatever name you put on the back of that jersey, I'm going defensive. Like I said, the only guy that I might be like talked into is CJ Stroud, but you got to go defensive line. But if you're looking for a guy who is certainly, he's been a former Pro Bowler, he's been a 3-time Pro Bowler, he's been a double-digit sack guy, he's not going to cost you a lot of money. Like we said, he just signed a 1-year, $5 million deal with Miami. And then when they got Bradley Chubb, he was basically phased out and certainly didn't play as much. So all reports are that he's going to be a free agent. But maybe a guy who, and he's 33 years old. You're not looking for him to play tons of snaps. You're not looking for him to start a whole bunch of games. He started 3 times in 17 games and still had 6 sacks. Can we get one of those guys? Can we get some of those guys? We talk about we got all this money to spend and this, that, and the other. Okay, let's load up a bunch of those guys. Let's throw a whole bunch of those guys into the mix and let's see if somebody shakes out when it's then all said and done. So if you're looking for low cost, but maybe value oriented, Melvin Ingram might be a guy. I still take a defensive player, defensive end player with the number 8 pick overall, and I might even draft another guy later on. But I don't like the edge class. I don't like Marcus Davenport. I don't like Robert Quinn. I don't think he's good value. I think you pay a lot of money for a guy who might be on the downside of his career. Marcus Davenport's been a guy that I know that, he's got ties to Ryan Nielsen. Marcus Davenport's a guy that's, 2 of the last 3 years is combined for 2.5 sacks or something. I mean, let me put it this way. Marcus Davenport had half a sack more than I did this past season. But Melvin Ingram might be a guy that comes from a system that's sort of comparable to what the Falcons have run or are running. And at $5 million, if I have to pay him $6 million and he gives me 6 sacks, brother, I'll take that. We talk about getting to 40 sacks. We talk about the pathway to there. If I can't find a guy that's going to give me 10, 12, 14 sacks, then let me have 7 guys that give me 5 or 6 sacks, and I'll be in pretty good shape. But Melvin Ingram is a guy to watch for that maybe the Falcons make a move on him. Most likely not going to be back with the Miami Dolphins. Maybe he's a good kind of value pickup for this Atlanta Falcons franchise. All right, besides making Hittin Hard with Jon Chuckery your first listen every day, make Locked On Sports Today your second listen. The biggest stories of the day, instant reactions, big game recaps, and the take of the day. It's available on Spotify, Apple, YouTube, or wherever you get your favorite podcast from. So the Atlanta Hawks dodged a bullet over the weekend. So this whole 4-team trade that the Hawks were involved in with Portland, Golden State, Detroit, and the Hawks. So the Hawks were in the Detroit part of it where they got Saddiq Bey. They handed over some second-round picks. Golden State was going to sweeten up the pot with a couple of second-round picks that were going to go to the Hawks, and then they were going to go off to Detroit and all that. And I believe it was 5 second-round picks at the end of the day. Then we come to find out on Friday night, and this was wild. Friday night, we find out that Gary Payton II had failed his physical with the Golden State Warriors. And there's some shenanigans about, was he playing through injury? Did the trainers force him to take Toradol shots and everything else? Because the reports are that Gary Payton could miss as much as 3 more months of the season. And he's by and large not played this year. They were bringing him back to Golden State. He was a key component for their run last year, bringing him back to Golden State. But they're talking about that he could miss as much as 3 months of time with a core muscle injury. And then obviously this deal was in real jeopardy for the Hawks getting Saddiq Bey. Well, now we know that Saturday night it went through. I believe that the Golden State Warriors are not going to clear him medically or anything like that, but they're still going to try to look for recourse from the league about the way Portland handled all this. That whole thing is a fiasco. But the important part is we got Saddiq Bey, who was sitting on the bench the other night. I believe it was Saturday night. He was Friday or Saturday night, was sitting on the bench for the Atlanta Hawks. And they were talking to him in the locker room and all this kind of stuff, but they couldn't suit him up. Even though they made, and by the way, Friday night after the game, they made the trade official. Like they announced the trade that, hey, he's here for the Hawks, and then they couldn't play him. So now he's available and ready. I don't know if he plays tonight. He hasn't really practiced with the Hawks because of this whole fiasco and things like that. But Hawks dodged a bullet at the end of the day. And they got what was the best piece of the pieces that they got back in their multiple trades. They got back the best piece of the deals that they made. Now you got to take advantage. And this is an important week for the Atlanta Hawks. So you're coming off a couple of wins. You beat the Phoenix Suns. You beat the San Antonio Spurs, right? Now you got to go to Charlotte. Yeah, they've beaten you twice. They have the fewest wins in the Eastern Conference. Let's not look over it. And if it wasn't for the Hawks, I think they're tied for the fewest wins in the Eastern Conference. If it wasn't for the Atlanta Hawks, they would have the fewest wins in the Eastern Conference because the Hawks have beaten them, or sorry, the Hornets have beaten the Hawks twice. They beat them up there and they beat them here in Atlanta. You got to go get a victory tonight. And if you can get you can get to your trade acquisitions, to play tonight, perfect. But you got to find a way to win. And we've talked about this last week that, they got to protect their home court advantage. They're going on the road tonight to Charlotte. You got to beat a bad team on the road. But this is an important week for the Atlanta Hawks coming up here. After you get past Charlotte, you get the New York Knicks coming in here on Wednesday. You get the Cleveland Cavaliers coming in after the All-Star break. So you'll get a respite, but the Hawks have, on February 24th, the Cavaliers coming in, and the schedule gets, pretty ramped up and things. Cleveland, Brooklyn, Washington, Portland, and then, you go on the road to Miami for what is back-to-back games with a day separated in between, and then back-to-back games against the Wizards. Well, the Wizards are, they're basically I think a game and a half below what the Hawks are. So you've got teams that are directly around you that you're going to play in the next couple of weeks with the All-Star game mixed in. And you certainly needed Saddiq Bey. He's a guy that, coming off the bench will provide a pretty good scoring punch, a guy that, can get in the mix offensively. Again, if DeAndre Hunter gets hurt or injured like that, you feel like you've got a small forward and you feel like a guy who can get you some buckets. Everything I've read and heard about Saddiq Bey is really positive, that he's a really good offensive player. He's not a dreadful defensive player. He's, probably average defensively, but he certainly is a guy who can go get you some buckets out there. But you have to take advantage right now. And you got to win tonight and get 3 in a row and then beat the Knicks at home. And if you go into the All-Star break with a 4-game winning streak, it's going to feel a lot more confident, feel a lot better about, okay, we're going to rest up, get right, and then get back at it, because Cleveland, Brooklyn, Washington, those are all playoff teams. I still think that the Nets are not going to take nearly the step back that some people think that they are. Even losing Durant and Kyrie, that's still a good basketball team. They still have some talent, but you can do yourself a lot of favors. And when we talk about trying to get up in the standings and we talk about, okay, how do we get to that, 5, 6 seed, whatever like that? Okay, well, you can't get to those seeds until you beat the teams directly in front of you, right? Like you can't be the 7 seed or you can't be the 6 seed until you become the 7 seed, right? You just have to climb that ladder. Well, that's the Knicks and the Wizards and the Cavs and Brooklyn and all those teams that are right there in front of you. So the fact is, the Hawks dodged a bullet because this thing was very iffy about whether or not, and look, kudos that everybody was able to work everything out. There'll probably be some ramifications for, the league with Portland, and they didn't disclose their injury, whatever. That's a them problem and all that. But our part of it, we've got Saddiq Bey in tow, and you're playing the team with the fewest wins in the Eastern Conference coming up here tonight in there. And then you get the Knicks, and then you get the All-Star break. Hawks have to take advantage of it. 16 of their 26 games are going to be at home. They're only 3 games above 500 at home. You got to take advantage of your home schedule. You dodged a bullet. You've got your pieces in place, and you've got to beat these teams around you. I do think that the Hawks definitely have a chance to still move up within the Eastern Conference, because you're going to play all the teams that are right there around you, whether directly behind you, whether teams that are in front of you. Are the Hawks better than, the top of the Eastern Conference, the Boston's, Milwaukee's, Philadelphia? No, but you're trying to find your way into, okay, can we just get to the 6th seed and find our way out of the play-in tournament, right? Can you find your way not being in the play-in tournament when all is said and done? Because that wasn't a good feeling last year to have to go win 2 games before you could even get into a first-round playoff. So this is a stretch where you take advantage of the fact that this trade and everything went through. You take advantage of the fact that it's a good home schedule for you, and you take advantage of the fact that, okay, you've got a bad team tonight, and then the Knicks come into your place on Wednesday, start to accumulate some wins. And if you just win basketball games, everything else can fall into place. If everybody else gets hot and you're hot as well, then, nothing you can do about it. All you can do is just win basketball games and take care of your business. All right, besides making Hittin Hard with Jon Chuckery your first listen, everybody, make sure you make Locked On Sports Today your second listen. Biggest stories of the day, instant reactions, big game recaps, and the take of the day. Available Spotify, YouTube, wherever you get your favorite podcast from. We ask you to head over to youtube.com to put Locked On Sports Atlanta into your search browser. When you get there, hit that subscribe button as we're going to 6,000 folks to be part of our community. Leave us a comment. We're free and available to download on all of your favorite podcast platforms, including Spotify, Apple Podcasts, wherever you get your favorites from. Roku and Amazon Fire. Yes, we are available on those platforms as well. Check us out there, and then give me a follow on my personal Twitter page at JMCH316. Back with you tomorrow. This has been Hittin Hard with Jon Chuckery, Locked On Sports Atlanta.